Hello, welcome to another episode of History in the Dark. I am your host, Darkness the Curse. And before we begin, as always, thank you so much to my generous patrons, my British rail critics, and of course, my underwater train finders. You are the reason why this content remains never completed. I never get anything done around here. Except I do 3 videos a week, which, shoot me. And today, we are going to discuss airplanes again. But this time, instead of mad science experiments or just bad planes in general, we're going to talk about airplane concepts. Planes that were planned to be built, ideas. Some even got as far as some early prototype work. For whatever reason, they never actually got off the ground in any real way, but they were all nuts. These are 5 of the craziest never-built airplanes. The Tsybin RSR. I'm giving you a bit of a softball choice this time because, to be realistic, compared to other planes of similar types that actually got built, such as the SR-71, the RSR isn't necessarily nuts, but it went through so many growing pains and so many bizarre takes on the idea to get to where it ended up, and then cancelled, that I think it still counts a little crazy. This is a Soviet project that was meant to be an advanced long-range Mach 3 strategic reconnaissance aircraft. The project got its start as just the RS in 1954. That was supposed to be a ramjet-powered supersonic strategic bomber. However, that design was proven to be impractical. It just wasn't going to work. So they tried a smaller derivative, the 2RS, which would achieve intercontinental range by being air-launched from a modified Tupolev Tu-95 bomber. That also didn't really work that well at all. And this is because the aircraft actually wouldn't have enough fuel to return to base if it was used on an intercontinental mission. It was also incapable of carrying a thermonuclear bomb, defeating its entire point. So they revised the design again, this time with the intention of the aircraft being able to take off from actual conventional runways, and they dubbed it the RSR. Instead of ramjets, which need air flowing through them in order to do anything, this new aircraft would use turbofans. And instead of being a bomber, it was to be a strategic reconnaissance aircraft. It was supposed to be primarily of aluminum construction, with a long circular section fuselage. Inside the fuselage would be a pressurized cabin for a single pilot. This new design was meant to cruise at greater than Mach 2, at a height of 20,000 meters or 65,600 feet, and have a range of 3,760 kilometers or 2,340 miles. It did technically have a prototype, but it wasn't the finalized design. This was called the NM-1, and that was constructed in 1957. It was intended for low-speed handling tests. It had a steel tube fuselage with duraluminum and plywood skinning. It didn't use turbofans, but turbojets, and it first flew on the 7th of April 1959. Those trials show that the maneuverability of the RSR might be a bit questionable, and that was concerning because they weren't sure how it would be able to avoid surface-to-air missiles otherwise. So they redesigned it again, this time calling it the R020, to make it more maneuverable at high altitude. And it was equipped with the more conventional Tumansky R11 turbojets, as the turbofans it was supposed to use weren't actually available. 5 of the prototype airframes actually wound up being nearly complete, simply awaiting their engines by April of 1961, and they planned to build 10 more, but that's when the Soviet premier at the time, Nikita Khrushchev, decided to cancel the program. The Messerschmitt P.1101. Germany had a lot of unbuilt concepts during World War II, and this one almost got to the prototype stage, and it's once again a bit of a softball choice because it isn't necessarily insane, and in many ways it's actually a lot more modern than plenty of other aircraft at the time. You've probably noticed already, But not only does this jet aircraft integrate the jet with the fuselage, but it's a variable sweep aircraft. It uses swept wings, and that's again a very modern take on a fighter aircraft, but the sweep of the wings was meant to be adjustable. The angle could be changed before flight, depending on the situation. The design would later influence a lot of modern aircraft, even though it would never actually get off the ground itself. It was first envisioned specifically for the emergency fighter program, the same program the HE-162 was built for. Not only were the wings and engine placement very forward-thinking, but so was the cockpit, as the canopy was also integrated into the fuselage and formed part of the rounded nose, another modern take on a jet aircraft. By the time World War II came to a close and the Americans came upon the prototype, it was about 80% complete. It actually became a popular prop for GI souvenir photos. American forces removed the prototype from the tunnel where it was hidden, and all associated documents were seized. The prototype was shipped first to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and then it wound up at Bell Aircraft Works in Buffalo, New York in 1948. That's where the Allison J-35 engine was attached to it. But damage to the prototype actually ruled out any possibility of repair, although many of the design features went in to the Bell X-5, which was completed, and it was the first aircraft capable of varying its wing geometry while in flight. So in a weird way, the P-1101 did wind up getting built, just not by the people who first designed it. The Convair Submersible Seaplane. We all live in an underwater plane, underwater plane, underwater plane. We all okay, I'll stop. And now we're getting into some really crazy stuff, which I'm sure you figured as this list descended into madness. Sometimes called a subplane, this concept actually has been drawn up by multiple sources over the years, from the UK to the Soviets to Convair. This was actually a US Navy project to produce a seaplane which could travel underwater as well as fly. It could just do everything. Put tank treads on it while you're at it too. Let it be a tank. Why not? It could do anything. Magical. This is clearly a G.I. Joe vehicle is what I'm trying to say. The contract was granted to Convair sometime in the early 60s. Sources actually dispute whether it was 1962 or 1964, but it was around there. It was intended for anti-submarine warfare. The idea was that it would be able to scout for enemy submarines from the air, and when they detected one, they would land in the water, submerge, and engage the enemy. The design parameters that Convair had actually had a fairly slow aircraft for that time, only being able to fly about 220 miles per hour, or 350 kilometers per hour. It would also have an underwater performance up to 10 knots, or 19 kilometers per hour, and a depth of about 75 feet, 23 meters. It would be able to do all of this stuff for about 10 hours. Convair's take on it would have been a flying boat, not a float plane, which is a little bit different. And it would be powered by 3 turbojets with a crew of 2. It would also carry a payload of up to 1,500 pounds, 680 kilograms. It would use ballast tanks to dive and surface like a conventional submarine, and those would be located in the wings and in the fuselage. It wouldn't have any air-to-air ability. The weaponry was to be torpedoes or mines, and for undersea operations the turbojets would be sealed watertight, and underwater propulsion would be provided by a battery-powered electric motor that would drive a propeller. Convair did build scale models that were tested, and it showed that it could work, but the project didn't get beyond that. It was canceled by Congress sometime in 1965, or 1966, again, depends on who you ask. And to be honest, looking at it, I'm not sure how well it would have gone as an effective weapon. I mean, maybe this is just me, but for one thing, if it could fly, not having any air-to-air capability and being that slow would have made it pretty vulnerable to attacks by anything other than a submarine. Also, if it could detect submarines from the air, why not just have it drop depth charges? I mean, that's what modern aircraft do when they detect a submarine in warfare, and that seems to work just fine. You don't have to go through the hassle of landing in the open ocean, submerging, and then attacking the submarine. Just do it from the sky like a normal person. This project would have been very expensive, and I question the point of it. As cool as it may have been, though, because I will stress that, the idea of a plane that could also be a submarine, yeah, that's pretty awesome, not gonna lie. I just don't think there was a point to it. The Boeing X-20 Dyna-Soar. You called it the Dyna-Soar? I'm so happy with that name, you have no idea. And yes, I know, I haven't uploaded on Prehistory in the Dark in months, because no one likes it when I talk about dinosaurs. It's sad. But, in this instance, Dyna-Soar was short for Dynamic Soarer, and it was a United States Air Force program that was meant to develop a space plane. Yes! Space planes are something that has been historically sought after for many years, and there's been very few examples of truly successful ones. The only ones that have been able to do everything a space plane does has been the Space Shuttle, the Soviets' Buran, and the X-37. The most successful out of those three, of course, being the famous Space Shuttle. But even before that, Boeing and the Air Force were looking at another take on the concept, and I think there are many avenues of growth that the space plane concept has here. I mean, the idea of an aircraft that can fly and then simply go into space has been well and truly in the realm of science fiction for a long time. I mean, just consider stuff like Star Wars or Star Trek. Many of the aircraft in both those mediums have been shown to be able to travel in the atmosphere of planets and go into space. We've been trying to do the same thing for years with limited success, and the Dyna-Soar is one of the earliest attempts at it. The program was officially started on October 24th, 1957, and it ran to December 10th, 1963. It cost the US $660 million of research funding. In modern money, that's $5.84 billion, but I'm gonna be real with you people, whenever we're putting money into science and space and things like that, I have no complaints. I actually encourage money to be blown on that sort of thing, because at least even if the project fails, we learn something that can help in many other avenues of life. People often don't realize how much the space program has influenced our day-to-day lives, from the creation of new materials to new inventions and things like that. Reaching for the stars does have an effect on the quality of life of regular people, even if you don't see it. And I do think it's kind of where humanity needs to go next. This planet won't last forever. If our species is going to survive, we must reach for the stars. And I really just want to get off this rock. Have you seen this place lately? I'm out. But back to the Dyna-Soar. As an early take on a space plane, well, it was like a plane. It looked like a plane. That made it very, very dissimilar from space capsules at the time. Because, well, they were space capsules. Mercury and Vostok were both simply orbital capsules that could be somewhat maneuvered, but would then land under parachute. The Dyna-Soar was meant to be able to fly, as well as go into space, and then return to Earth and land at an airfield just as the Space Shuttle did. It was bold and much more advanced as a concept than other human spaceflight missions of the same time period. And it even did get to the mock-up stage, but it never actually flew. Certain components were tested, some were flown and tested on other aircraft, but the X-20 itself, even as a prototype, never actually took to the air. The reason is that there were many problems with the idea, especially back then. Like I said, this was incredibly ambitious, and for one thing, it would have been violently expensive. Building a space plane now is expensive, let alone back in the 60s. But cost really wasn't a deciding factor with this thing, because at the time, the US government saw fit to throw just all the money in the universe at the space race, because they had to beat those dastardly communists! And it would be certainly nice if the land of the free would have a space plane, while the Soviets were still fiddling around with capsules. No, it was issues over the booster to be used, as well as the clear lack of a reason for the project. There were plenty of boosters that could launch it, all of which were proposed with various upper stage and booster combinations, but the Air Force couldn't figure out which one they really wanted. It took so long for them to decide that it really delayed the project badly and complicated the planning of it. Then they had to deal with their reasoning. For one thing, it was debated whether or not the US Air Force should even be fiddling with space at all. because some thought that this should be the primary domain of NASA. The Air Force's main argument was that not only would this project allow for controlled re-entry and therefore fly like a plane, but also it was kind of a military project. And NASA wasn't completely a military organization. Their main focus was science, not necessarily military applications, though it's been debated that they may have been involved in some military missions in the past, and certainly have a close working relationship with military organizations like the United States Air Force. But coupled with the projects that NASA was working on, like Gemini, the Dyna-Soar didn't really seem that, well, reasonable. Why put all the money into this when we could focus on one thing at a time? Some of the top brass thought that the project was trying to run before it could walk. Gemini was a lot more reasonable, using more familiar technology. It was still pushing the envelope, but not as hard as the X-20 would. And in order to maintain their sovereignty over their project, the Air Force had been placing a lot of emphasis on the controlled re-entry aspect, and they didn't actually have any real objectives for orbital flight, which is kind of a big part of being a spaceplane. Couple all this with the expense, and the fact that it wouldn't actually be ready for launch until at least the mid-60s, and that was at the earliest, it meant that the Air Force just couldn't justify the program, and it was cancelled on December 10th, 1963. The Lockheed CL-1201. Oh boy, now we're getting into some real nonsense, some real crazy, unspeakable madness. There's no competition for this absolute display of, well, I'm gonna kindly say, imagination. But I'm also going to point out that whoever imagined this was out of their mind. This was a design study by Lockheed that was carried out in the late 1960s, and it was supposed to be an airborne aircraft carrier. There are plenty of concepts for airborne aircraft carriers that have been done over the years, and it's a pretty hard thing to pull off, though the utility of having an effective one is certainly something the militaries all over the world have looked at. But the CL-1201, even in this vein, was out of control. It would have a wingspan of 1,120 feet, 340 meters. That would be the largest span of any airplane to date, even now, and more than twice that of any in the 20th century. The wing would be crescent-shaped. It could carry up to 22 fighter aircraft externally, and would have an internal dock capable of handling 2 air-to-ground shuttle transport aircraft. It also had a logistics support variant that could have a conventional heavy transport role. But how would such a gargantuan beast that was estimated to weigh at least 11.85 million pounds, or 5,375 metric tons, supposed to stay in the air? Well, that's easy. It was going to be nuclear-powered! I mean, duh! If you're gonna make a giant nonsense plane, why would you not, therefore, install nuclear reactors? Also, in order to get airborne in the first place, it couldn't just use its onboard power. Nah, it would need 182 additional vertical lift engines, because, yeah, why not? This whole thing is well and truly insane. However, rather cool, I must admit. And if you're gonna make an airborne aircraft carrier, making it nuclear powered and therefore capable of staying in the air for multiple days at a time kinda makes sense. Part of the reason why aircraft carriers are so effective is not only can they go all over the place, but they can stay in that place and then move around, and then stay in another place, and then move around, all without needing to be refueled. An airplane needs to stop and get fuel fairly frequently. You would need something that could, well, not do that. And nuclear power is really the only way to reasonably currently achieve that at this time. Or back then, for that matter. But is using nuclear power in the sky reasonable, especially when it's such a large, rather easily targetable aircraft that has gone beyond the point of being a plane, and I know I've said this before, but I'll say it again, it is now effectively an ace combat boss? Well, the answer is, no. No, it's not. There's a reason why this was only a design study. The Air Force did not actually look into this seriously, as far as anybody knows, because... What? No, of course they didn't. Good God. Would it have been cool? I mean, maybe. But reasonable? No. No, I don't think so. Will we ever see anything like it in the future? I doubt it. Not as long as it has to use nuclear power anyway. If they could somehow work out getting solar power to work on a plane, I might be able to envision something like this then. But putting nuclear power in the sky has always been a really, really, really difficult subject with people. And with me included. It's just too dangerous. On a boat or a sub, that's one thing. But in the sky, where it could land anywhere if something goes wrong? No, that's not. And with that, a special thank you goes to all my underwater train finders. Thomas Ward, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, 72267, Orange Glass, Joshua Long, Ohio Trucker 1, Royal Hudson 2860, Lord Hoth 444, Arthur Roy, Benjamin Owens, Panzer Kitsune 131-232, Mr. Black Rose, DM Tribal Typhoon, Master of None, Josh Johnson, Lock Kraken, Twin Fox, Diamond Blade 17, Anzac A1, Dazzy Wazit, and Tommy Rossini. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.